Back on. You are listening to Live from the Heartland. We were just talking with David Orr and Fred Shine about Toby Prinz. I just wanted to add to that is all happening next week at the Artists of the Wall Festival, which is the 21st annual. And just so you know, there is free music at the beach both days, June 14th and June 15th. The ceremony naming the beach is at 2:30 on Saturday, June 14th, followed by, get this, Vanessa Davis Band at our beach for free. Thank you, Lucy Smith.
Yeah, nice.
So the work of a small but dedicated committee of folks who do this every year is coming to a finish, and join us, Artists of the Wall Festival next weekend. Now I get to say good morning, my sister.
Good morning, Katie, and Tom, and Michael.
Katie's going to reach across here if you don't put this really close to your mouth.
I'm there.
And thank you for sharing.
It'll be like when you were kids, grabbing each other's
And
food.
congratulations, Grandma.
Thank you.
We did actually mention that before you came, so we won't say anything more as per your wishes, but congratulations. You are here to talk about an event that is a number of years in the happening as well. So good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Live from the Heartland again.
Thank you very much.
Here is Eileen from the YWCA up in Evanston.
Right, and I'm here to talk about next Sunday's 15th annual Ricky Birdsong Memorial Race Against Hate. For those of you who don't know the history, Ricky Birdsong was a beloved coach at Northwestern. He was an African American, excuse me, and he was the victim of a hate crime. In 1999, he was walking in his neighborhood with his kids, and he was shot by a white supremacist who had come through West Rogers Park first, shot at some of our neighbors here who were on their way to synagogue, continued up into Evanston, saw a black man walking down the street, shot and killed him, drove to Indiana that night, and the next day shot a Korean graduate student at Indiana University, and then killed himself. And
I'm always wondering, why don't they start with themselves? I mean, could we get a movement that people with guns who want to do crazy stuff can? Right?
They wouldn't get headlines that way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Actually,
the
that was a
amazing
terrible
thing
thing.
is that Ricky Birdsong's wife, Sherilyn, decided that she had to respond in a way that wasn't going to continue the hate. And her decision was to say, we need to gather as a community. We'll do this every year on Father's Day because Ricky was a good father. He was with his kids as this happened. They live with that for the rest of their lives. And so every year since then on Father's Day, there's been the Race Against Hate. It happens up in Evanston at Longfield on Sheridan Road. It starts up at the north end of the Northwestern campus. It is a beautiful route. It's a 10K, a 5K run, as well as a 5K walk, and a 1 mile youth. There's a youth mile as well. The reason that it's important for me is I'm the Director of Racial Justice Programs for the YWCA Evanston North Shore. And about 8 years ago, well, it certainly feels appropriate to be talking after talking about Toby Prinz and the power of an individual to gather some collective impact and make change, because that's what has to happen on the whole issue of racism in our country.
On so many fronts.
On so many fronts. It's the only way that change ever has happened, as the Margaret Mead quote says. Mm-hmm. But what happens next Sunday is that over 5,000 people will participate in this in the race, but an entire community will gather, will run, will talk, will laugh, will line Sheridan Road, and all will be walking around for the rest of the day with this message on their T-shirt of Race Against Hate. And when we ask people, why do you race? And last year we had them write it down and hold it in front of themselves. And it ranges from everything from people the age of a Toby Prinz saying, I will keep doing this until our world really changes, to little kids who say, I think people should be nice to each other. And to a child last year, about an 11-year-old boy who said, I heard about a man who was killed when he was just walking on the street because of his skin. I don't like that. So it's as simple as that, and it's as complex as that. And it's part of the mission of the YWCA to eliminate racism and empower women.
Well, it's really become an institutionalized event. I mean, I'm a regular, and I mean real regular, at the Evanston YMCA, and there are, any day you go in there, there are 2, 3, 4, 10 people with Race Against Hate T-shirts on from previous 14 races. And I think it's really wonderful that it's taken off. It's too bad it had to be instituted after such a tragic event. But you and other people who have been involved with this really have taken something that was very negative and made it ultra positive. And I just want to commend you on that.
Well, thank you.
Nice work, Eileen and YW. I love it that it's the YW because my experience, limited though it was, since I was, raised Catholic, and the YW was, Publix. Not exactly, just not. But by the time I was a grown-up and could appreciate where good organizing was happening, the YW downtown, the YW on the south side at 63rd
And nationally.
Street, were always, in my opinion, doing significant organizing and change-oriented work.
From their foundation, when the YWCA began after the Civil War, part of it was there were no safe places for women to stay by themselves, and so YWCA's started to be created as a place where women could come if they were moving from one city to another. It would be a place that their parents knew they could go and have a room at the YWCA. So it was that kind of a thing. But then as our society started to change, the YWCA was often the first place in a city where there was an integrated employee lunchroom. If you go through the histories, who had the first integrated lunchroom anywhere in the country? The YWCA. Who had the first public place where people could gather across the races? The YWCA. In Evanston, the original formation in the 30s of the YWCA, it had 16 rooms where young women who were coming either to work or go to Northwestern could stay. But it also was the place where women of color who worked in the beautiful mansions along the lakefront would spend their day off because they weren't welcome in the stores, they weren't welcome at the beaches, and they didn't have anywhere to go. So they would go and spend their day off, writing letters, playing cards, taking naps, but it was a place where they were welcome, always. And it's so interesting to be thinking about the beaches, that one of the tenets of the YWCA is a connection with swimming, because it is so clearly a place where racism steps in all of our history. People of color were not welcome at the beaches. People of color were not welcome in private pools. So people of color still to this day drown at a rate 3 times higher than whites in our country. And it's because of a systemic issue that happened through the centuries, really. And so one of the things that the YWCA is involved in now, along with the YMCA and the public schools in Evanston, is a program called Evanston Swims, where every second grader is coming through one of these pools every month on the day that they have early dismissal. The buses bring them to these 3 different locations, and volunteers from our swim staff and some of the master swimmers in our program are teaching every second grader in Evanston to swim. And it started with a pilot of 3 schools, and this year it was 8 schools, and next year we hope it's all of the elementary schools.
So I'm curious, with your sister sitting here, growing up on the Southwest Side, how did you come to this anti-racism work?
Well, my sister is part of the reason. You're part of the reason. We grew up on the very far southwest side of the city in a very proudly racist neighborhood. Our parents were activists who were speaking with some of their peers about they wanted to raise the question, what would it be like if we were welcoming instead of, we grew up with this language. They're not going to cross State Street, are they? Oh, no, they're not, but they won't cross Halsted. Oh, now they're all the way to Ashland. That was part of the soundtrack of our life. We grew up in a neighborhood where
With
women.
a few words we won't say on the radio.
Right. There were women from our block who went and yelled and screamed and spit at the 7 kids who were bused to our local public school in the wonderful busing that occurred in the 60s. So there were also people like Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, others who were high schoolers that had some dreams and some wonderful teachers in the places where they were, who said, let's talk about better understanding among students, if I recall correctly. Operation
So good.
Operation
Bus.
BUS.
Operation Bus.
Better understanding among students. And I was the little
Pretty good
sister
tagline, huh?
who was watching these activists crossing lots of boundaries. I remember the first time one of your friends who was African American was coming to our house in Mount Greenwood, in a neighborhood where black people did not walk down the street ever. And how nervous our whole family was for him.
And I was totally oblivious.
And she was just like, "Oh, rock
I was
on!
like,
Oh,
come
this
on
is
in.
great!"
Come on in.
And we were
I
saying,
didn't put anybody a hood over anybody's face or anything like that, which Halloran talks about from her neighborhood.
right? Well, and I worked downtown in the early '70s and went to dinner with 3 other women from my office at each other's homes, and one of the women was African American. And one of the women lived in Cicero. And if you know the history, Cicero was not a place where a person of color was welcome. And we literally did have her in a scarf tied under her chin, but pulled out to here to walk from the car to the house the night that we went to that house. And our society has continued to live in this way of, well, we have to do this because some people aren't comfortable. This isn't about comfort. Eliminating racism is really about equity and saying everybody who's here is here, everybody deserves exactly the same access to all of the same services, whether it's the beaches, whether it's good schools. We look at our education system, which completely favors people who are white over anybody of color. So they're all connected, everything that you've been talking about today.
Eileen, I love it
It
that you
always
work
is.
at the YWCA. And as a longtime member, I mean, I think from the time I was 6 or 7, I've been involved with the YMCA. And I know that I think I learned a lot of wonderful things at the Y. But when I came to Illinois in 1960, and I think it was in 61, I was looking for a place to work out. I went up to the Waukegan Y, and I realized that it was segregated. There was a Genesee Street branch Y in North Chicago. Here in Evanston, they've had a number of events, and they really are building it into the tradition of the YMCA, or the folklore of it, about how I think it was the Emerson Y, it was a black YMCA,
Right.
which ended up being closed. And in the last couple of years, the McGaw Y has had this kind of acknowledging the history and the forgiveness and it coming together. I think since we talked a little bit of the historical perspective on the YWCA, can you address why you think maybe just women are hipper than men, but why the WCA
Well, yes,
was
there's
more
that.
advanced than the YMCA on the racial front?
You said it, women are hipper than men. No.
Well, I do believe that. I mean, women come to the understanding the issues
no argument.
sometimes a lot more quickly than men do.
Right, but it's always the people who have less that come to it first. So women were not in positions of power in our country, and so women understood the need to have places where women could come and be safe. They understood the need to have places where people of color could come and be safe. And so in that way, it's always the people who have less that think about what's needed. And so, and quite honestly, the issue that you described about the YMCA, it was very much a taking apart of the black community in Evanston. The Y was closed, the black hospital was closed, the stores in that neighborhood were closed. Literally, there were houses where black families lived that were lifted up and moved because they were in a neighborhood that really was more comfortable being white, and people were told, here, you'll be more comfortable, and houses were
Wow.
moved to be put into the Fifth Ward.
Wow.
And there's so many people that don't understand the history, that don't know that story, and people say, oh, whatever the group is, whatever the group that's trying to get equity is always, what do they want now? What do women want now?
There's a lot of stuff we still all want.
Aren't we done with all this stuff about race? We've got a black president, for crying out loud. Yeah, we have a black president who's been stopped at every single turn, disregarded, made fun of in comics in ways that we would never, ever do to a white president. And our country is allowing this. And so it takes people like Toby Prinz and her talking to other people. It's the same kind of activism that's required around the issue of race.
Have we moved the meter from your experiences growing up that you described earlier and just the dynamics you were talking about just now?
Well, we have laws in place that make certain things that happened in 1960 impossible to happen now.
I guess I'm talking more about hearts and minds.
Hearts and minds, when we look at individuals, lots of people understand the issue of equity and the lack of equity. But a lot of people still, there's a fear. Anytime there's a group that is asking for something, the group in power feels like, well, I'm going to lose something. So when a school is making a curricular change that's going to benefit everybody, the people who've always been benefiting say, oh, well, that's not going to be good for my kids. Well, we got to fight this, without thinking, wait a minute, my kid's not going to lose anything by somebody else having the same thing my kid has, but it comes from fear, and we don't address it because race is a topic we're not supposed to talk about. So a lot of our racial equity programs are, in fact, trying to get people to talk. Yesterday I was running a Let's Talk at Lunch session in Evanston about the recent amazing article in The Atlantic.
I was going to bring that up.
Oh my gosh. The
reparations.
Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote the cover article.
We're going to have Salim Wakil up here to talk about that.
You make that call, Kate.
Okay.
It's about reparations. The title is The Case for Reparation, and it is the most well-written article because it's not beating anybody over the head. It's saying this isn't an issue about black and white. This is an issue about America. America was
morality.
It was about America was part of this and still is. And it just talks through. It's a beautiful article. If you want history of Chicago, it takes a family from Mississippi and their land being taken there, their horse being taken there, etc.
Yeah.
When they got here, what happened here, and steps forward. Beautiful, beautiful explanation of the Contract Buyers League on the West Side. So the thing is, we had this amazing conversation yesterday. There were 12 people sitting at a table. It's a drop-in, so I never know who's going to come. But I had said ahead of time, we're going to talk about this. And I sent people the link to it, to the article, as well as to a Bill Moyer's interview with the author. And people came because of the topic. They wanted to be in conversation with other people because we don't do that as a matter of course. And people say, I don't want to talk about race because I'll sound ignorant or I'll offend somebody, or I don't want to talk about race because I live it every day and I don't want to have to talk about it. We're talking about it, and we're trying to help people have that become the norm instead of, no, we're gonna avoid it.
So this is what I hate to bring this up, but I have to. A kid was killed on Howard Street yesterday. We're talking about Evanston and Rogers Park. This particular murder was related to a couple others, I'm understanding, that have happened, or a couple other shootings, if not all the way to murder. People are so upset about, and rightfully so, about the level of gun violence, mostly for our black youth. Mm-hmm. And we're the only North Side neighborhood that is integrated enough to actually have a look-see at that.
Right.
And so there's a schizophrenia here in this neighborhood about what's going on. We hear gunshot. Mm-hmm.
We always hear gunshots.
We hear it regularly, but we don't know what it means. So right in our own neighborhood, which we are prideful about being diverse, there is a disconnect.
Right.
And that we need to go right at the middle of that. We need to start protecting these kids.
We need to be able to say, what was that? I heard gunshots last night. What was it? And talk to the people who actually know that. Because we end up hearing, we read on the
Ridiculous
blankety-blank
blogs.
people hide behind their computer.
Yeah.
We have all the truths there. But hearing each other's stories and going to the parents of the kids who have been shot or the kids who are afraid to go out after 6 o'clock because they will get shot, and say, how is it that I live 2 blocks from you and your life is this way and my life is this way, and what do we need to do? And it's part of it is neighbors getting to know each other. We don't know each other as neighbors anymore. We're not outside.
A lot of us don't.
And I know that the Heartland as a neighborhood place is a place that works to dismantle that notion all the time. But block by block, if you said, when I was growing up, I can still tell you who lived in the houses on our block.
Right.
I won't bore you with that because we'd probably argue about it.
Good.
We're out of time.
No, we're not.
But understanding
For that we
that
are.
understanding community is a big piece of it, and understanding that community doesn't just mean people who have the same economic position that I have. It doesn't mean I'm only going to care about the people that I think deserve it. When we write about these shootings, yesterday afternoon, somebody called me to say there was a kid shot, and she was furious because she said the first thing that she read was the police say that they both had gang connections. So we should just write it off. Say, oh, okay, well, that's why
right.
that happened. We don't have to think about it. Instead of
right.
saying a young man who walked across the stage last Sunday afternoon at Evanston Township High School, got his diploma because he wanted to hand it to his mother, is dead now, 5 days later. We have to care about that. We have to know it's our responsibility. We are the people who are the problem solvers.
So if people want to walk next week, how can they get plugged into this?
They can take a registration form from me. They can register online up through Tuesday at www.ywca.org RAH 2014, Race Against Hate 2014. Or just Google Race Against Hate, and it'll come up.
Right. And it starts at 7:30 in the morning
Yep.
at Longfield.
At Longfield. And
Evanston.
even if you don't feel like participating in it, I would bring my lawn chair and sit somewhere up there.
Along
It
the-
is a beautiful morning.
Yeah, it
Great
is.
spirit. Sherilyn Birdsong and her family will all be there. And there's a lot of special things because it's the 15th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see all 15 years of T-shirts, Michael.
Eileen, I'm so proud of you. I'm so
Me
glad.
too.
I'm
Well,
so
you
glad.
were my model. You were my model. I wanted to grow up to be Katie.
Oh my
So
I lost my track of thought, Michael.
Well, I had
better
one
go.
thing I did want to say about, we pride ourselves in this neighborhood about diversity, and we do have probably the most multinational community maybe anywhere in the country. But there are a lot of people who move here because perhaps, some people move here because they think it'll be worth a lot of dough, but some people move here because they like diversity, but then they discover that they're not so sure they like class diversity.
Right.
So I always want to, when we talk about racism, I think we have to talk about classism too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that class is a real key. And there's going to be more and more people who are not in the middle class. So the issue is going to be coming up more and more.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to have I think 1 or 2 directors with some documentaries. One of them is called Documented. And the week after, we're going to have Fred Anzavino and Theo Ubuque talking about the Andrews sisters. So we've got a lot of wonderful shows coming up. Those of you who are listening in from anywhere in the world on WLUW.org, you can go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia, and you can see lots of earlier editions. Many of the people who were up today, David Orr, et cetera, Tom, there you can find wonderful videos with them talking about serious matters.
I'd like to thank Fred Shine, David Orr, Eileen Hogan Heineman for being up here today. Let's hear it for our guests. Thanks to the on-site, online, and radio audience, and we invite you to like our Facebook page, of course. And we thank the
Live
Heartland
from the Heartland
Cafe
Show.
for housing this event every Saturday morning. I thank Grant, Nolan, Paul, Mary, Hal. I think that's everybody, and I thank you guys.
Thank you,
thanks,
Katie.
Kate.
Thank you.
Do good in the world.
Well, you guys have a great time next week because I will not be here.
Do good in the world.
Because the world needs all the good that you do.
All power to the people.
Flavor your heart and your soul. Take us out, Nolan. 15 seconds left. Right on, sister.